I will never forget the first time I had to go deliver a death notification. Bad accident, 4:00 in the morning. Two drunk guys were on their way home out of Nashville, and a lady who worked at a local hospital and worked in the cafeteria was getting up and was headed into the Williamson County Hospital. They were drunk, crossed the center line, hit her head on, hit her so hard that it knocked her off the road and down an embankment. Wow. They called me to the scene. This was my very first one, so I was a rookie.
Yeah.
And gathered the information. There was some question about her identity, so I had to go to the house to deliver the death notification. And so the accident happened at 4:00 in the morning. By the time I got to the house, it was about 6:30, 7 o'clock, and so it was daylight by then. And when I pulled up in front of the house, it had huge windows, glass windows in the front. And as I pulled up in the driveway, I looked up there, and there's the noses of 3 little girls pressed against that window. And they were waiting for the school bus. And I thought, I've got to go in and tell them that their mother is dead. And I had to go in, and I did have to do that, and the husband. But then because we weren't sure of her identity, I had to get him to go with me to the county morgue and identify the body. And, you see that happening on shows on television.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, brother, until it happens to you, where you actually see that happen, or you're standing there with somebody and you have to pull that sheet back. So that first one, especially because those 3 little girls, sticks in my mind. I've had people attack me. I went and knocked on the door of a man one time to tell him his daughter, college student, had lost control in a car, had crossed the median. It was interstate, crossed the median, and went into the other lane and got hit by an 18-wheeler. Devastating accident. I had to knock on his door and wake him up at 2:00 in the morning. And when I told him, he turned very violent. He accused me of playing a terrible joke on him. It just wasn't true, and he came after me.
Wow.
I've had people who have passed out on me. I have had people who just took off running through the house, throwing anything to get their hands on, yelling and screaming. One of the most touching to me was a man had a bicycle accident here, and at a high speed, he lost control of his bike. It threw him head first into a guardrail and took off almost half his head. I had to go to his house to tell his wife. And when I knocked on the door, she came to the door. She was a very attractive lady. They were probably in their 50s, early 50s. And she was dressed up. Obviously, it was a Saturday morning. And told her who I was and whatever, and if I could come in. And she said, yeah, I'm just waiting on my husband to get home from his bike ride because we're going to lunch together. And I had to go in and tell her that he would not be coming home and what had happened. She went into probably the deepest shock I've experienced, and I will never forget this. She started putting her hands on me and put both hands on my face, just touching me and touching my arm. She said, you're not real. You're not here. And she did that for about 20, 30 minutes. And that kind of trauma and that kind of shock and that kind of pain, again, that wears on me worse than the blood in the guts. And there's other stories too, but those, you asked for some that stick in my mind. The neat thing about that is that lady whose husband was killed in the bicycle accident contacted me recently. And it's been several years, and she chased me down on Facebook to say thank you, and you'll never know how much it meant to me, the grace that you showed and the way that you walked me through those hours.
Yeah.
You know what? It makes it all worth it, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, if God can use me that way, if it can have that kind of impact on people, I'm good.
And is it challenging? I mean, I know you're there to bring God's peace in that situation in some way. Is that generally something that people can people even detect that, or is it just a matter almost of doing that within yourself, being a witness to them, and maybe years down the line when they reflect they'll see that? But
I think the key thing, and you touched on it, is what I call presence, and that's presence with a C, not with a T. just me allowing God to speak through me, allowing to have a presence there, a godly presence, a peaceful. This lady mentioned the word, how graceful I was. One of the things that I do when I go in a house is I immediately scan the house or the area that I'm in. And if I see things that reflect that these are people of faith, that opens the door for me to go that direction. If I don't see something like that, or it's not reflected in what I hear from them, I may not necessarily take it as much in that direction. I always ask if before I leave, if I can pray for them, and I ask for permission. I don't know that I've ever been told no. And then I always leave my card and ask them if I can follow up. And again, I ask them for permission. I don't want to bug you. For me, it's kind of like I may represent the most painful moment in their life. So they may not want to hear from me again. They may not want to see. But those are things that I try to do. And when at all possible, try to bring hope. Why does a car accident happen and a 17-year-old girl dies?
Yeah.
There may be physical reasons why, but it's always the question. There's unanswerable questions. Suicide. Why did he do that? Well, I don't know. What I try to bring to people is what we do know. I don't spend a lot of time worrying about what I don't know. I try to focus on what I do know, and I do know that God said He's always with us. He'll never leave us.
Yeah.
I do know that He said that I will never leave you and I will never forsake you. I do know that He said all things work together for good for those that love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. I do know that He said, my God shall supply all your needs through His glorious riches in Christ Jesus. So kind of and that's not just delivering a death notification, that's in the pastoral counseling that I do, or when people are in the midst of a divorce or dealing with drugs or whatever. Let's talk about what we do know. Let's claim what we do know. We'll continue to wrestle with those questions we can't answer, but let's not forget to claim what we do know as absolutes. So that's kind of my philosophy of where I try to take people.
And you've mentioned there just some of the reactions that you've seen from other people. For yourself, what has been the most overwhelming situation for you yourself in terms of just you processing what's going on? What was the most overwhelming situation for you?
I hadn't thought about this in a while, but as soon as you asked that question, I've got an immediate answer. 2 years ago, in my work as the chaplain for the high school football team here in the Outside the Lines ministry, I got a call on a Sunday morning, and it was our head coach, who I'm very close to. And he said, Corky, I think we've got a dead football player. And I'm like, what? And he said, yeah. He said, I'm not for sure, but let me call you right back. And he called me back, and sure enough, a few minutes later, Susie and I were getting ready to go to church. It was a Sunday morning. And he said, yeah, so-and-so is dead. And long story short, 15, 16 of our football players had a camp out that night. And when they got up the next morning, they couldn't wake him up. And again, long story short, he had died of alcohol poisoning, basically drowned in his own vomit. But those kids were there. Those kids were there with their buddy trying to do CPR on him. One of the dads showed up that owned the property and whatever. So coach said, I don't know. He's a football coach, They're not used to having to deal with this kind of stuff. He said, what do I do? I said, well, tell you what, call your football coaches, tell them to meet me in the field house in 45 minutes, and we'll meet and we'll go from there. Man, I walked in that coach's office, and grown, strong football coach men are just devastated. And so I spent the first little bit helping them deal with their pain. It was excruciating. One of our players was dead. 15 other of our players had been with him. And okay, so then it was, okay, what do we do for that? And I gave them some keys on how to help the kids too, how to handle the trauma. And then it was like, we got to deal with the parents. And I said, why don't you call a parents meeting for 3:00 here in the field house, and we'll deal with them, and you and I will do whatever. So they did that, and so that was about 3 hours later. And I walked out of the coach's office in that field house, and there was over 200 parents, players there. And it was the most somber, painful. I had to step back for a minute before I could start. It is the most emotional thing I've ever dealt with. And when I'm beginning to start, I look over to my left, and coming through the door were the parents of the young man who had just died. And they wanted to be there with their football family. And that is just the most emotionally painful situation. And it went on from there. We had that meeting. I counseled with kids. We had visitation. The funeral itself was atrocious, and it was a long, emotional, and very draining week. And
was this a kid that you had known yourself, that you'd worked with?
Oh yeah, I was close to him. Yeah. I mean, I know all those kids. I mean, I'm their football chaplain. I'm with them every week. I was with them 2 or 3 times.
So this isn't just a friend of yours. It's a coach from another area. This is one that you've dealt with and worked with. And,
I work specifically with one school with this program. Now, I've been asked to go other places and speak and set programs up, but this one particular school is the one I've worked with for 25 years. And so they're like family to me. And we've worked real hard on those 25 years of building a family environment. And there's an unbelievably positive spiritual environment considering the fact that it's a public school. And we've worked hard on building that. We're not trying to convert kids to anything. We're just trying to teach them how to be godly men and women and go from being good football players to being good students to being good husbands, good fathers, good businessmen. That's what we're trying to grow. And so yes, but that I don't ever remember feeling as emotionally empty and drained as after that week.